One, we're ready to go. Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to today's webinar. I'm David Adler, the chairman and founder of BizBash, and I'm thrilled to introduce today's presenter, Joe Schwinger of MeetingPlay. Joe is the co-founder and CEO of MeetingPlay. It's a technology company forging meaningful connections through groundbreaking event technologies for notable clients such as Marriott, PepsiCo, Bristol-Myers Squibb. With a background in e-commerce, he has an extensive experience providing customer-facing solutions on a global scale. He's been recognized in various publications, including the 2018 list of 40 under 40 by Connect Corporate and the elite list of BizBash 500. Today, he will share how to become an expert at virtual and live events. But before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. Be sure to share your webinar feedback with hashtag #SmarterEvents and tag @BizBash or @MeetingPlay if you desire. We will be hosting a Q&A at the end of the webinar, so please submit your questions with the Q&A button right in your toolbar. I'm sure you know how to do that by now. And so at the conclusion of the webinar, we will be sending you out a copy of the recording so you can check back on everything that you discussed today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Joe.
Great, thank you so much, David. And really excited to be here with the number of participants that we have on. And basically, to kind of go in logistics, you know, I think that some of the best conversations that I've ever had actually have been you and I, David, speaking online. So I'm going to actually try and get through this in about 35 minutes so you and I can talk at the end and share our experiences over the last couple months. And myself, I would say, you know, in March, when everything started to go, we really went into education mode. And probably I was doing about 70 to 80 customer conversations a week for about 5 weeks straight. And it was really understanding kind of the direction that things were going to go in and where the industry was heading, which has turned out very impactful with where we are today. So the idea is to share kind of some of our learnings over the last 4 months, but also right now we're putting together a strong plan for when we get back on property. So I was a road warrior just like everybody else, and I probably spent about 3 out of 4 weeks on the road with our customers at their events, really diving into the logistics and how we can optimize technology. So just like you, I want to get back on the road and get back to business. But as you know, especially with some of the announcements that have happened over the next 2 days, we're kind of living in this virtual environment and definitely a hybrid environment. So the idea is, again, to walk away with some best practices to think about and some of the things that are going on in the industry so that you can better plan moving forward. So again, what we want to start with is the virtual environment, right? So, but now is the time that you actually should be thinking about what your secret sauce is going to be when we go back to live. And I think that some of the learnings that I'm going to share with you in the virtual environment will help better prepare you for some of the decisions that you'll be making when we do get back to live. So the other thing that, you know, to talk about, right, is when is that going to occur? And I think that all of us can agree that there's a perception that has to be cleared up before we can get back to live. And that all revolves around, do your attendees feel safe to travel, right? And honestly, this one question is what is going to shape basically the journey, right? The journey for us to get back on property. So when we end today, hopefully you'll be thinking a little bit about the technology and how that's going to change when we get on property to better assist with all of us getting back to that face-to-face environment. But until then, let's have some fun in the virtual environment. And I'm very actively involved in pretty much everything that we do, you know, with our customers. I'm always ingrained in the strategy. And the first thing that I tell people is we've got to have fun, right? If you think that planning a face-to-face meeting is difficult, well, It's so much more difficult in the virtual environment because there's so many factors to consider. So I've always been asked kind of like, Joe, what would you say are the best practices, right? Or what would you say is your recommendation moving forward? And I want to start with 3 components that will guide us as we move along. My number 1 piece of advice to everybody is make a decision and stick with it. What we're finding a lot with some of the conversations that we're having is really the decisions are left up in the air and you're not getting your contract started. And what's happening, you know, especially with the good kind of virtual providers or the ones that are doing hybrid, there's a lot of demand. It's an interesting situation to be in where, you know, MeetingPlay is kind of booked up, I would say, almost until the end of the year. We have so much demand. So my piece of advice to you is make a decision and stick with it, because the provider that you want to go with may not be able to service your event. And really, kind of a sub of this is you've got to trust your partner in this environment, that you know that they're always going to be there with you. I can't tell you how many times at 11 o'clock at night I'm on the phone with a client because they can't make a decision, but we've got to be there for them to move forward. So number 1, make a decision early and stick with it. Number 2, I mean, I have the great opportunity to work with some of the world's best event professionals I've ever met. And it seems like when we moved to this virtual environment, everybody forgot the second thing. You're a great event professional because you're creative. You bring solutions to your clients or your internal departments that make these events seamless and exciting. Well, that doesn't mean that you can't do so in a virtual environment. So remember, your creativity is what makes you successful. Bring those to your customers in a virtual environment or a hybrid environment and watch the smiles. And then, you know, I kind of feel like I have conversations sometimes with event professionals that feel that they're limited. Well, if there's another thing that you could walk away with is remember that your virtual environment should be a tool set to bring your ideas to market, to bring your ideas to your attendees. And nobody said that event professionals can't shine in a virtual environment. In fact, I've never been more surprised and engaged than some of the things that we're doing with some of our event professionals. And I'm going to go through some of those right here to talk about that. So let's talk about 5 tips that I could give you and some examples that you may already be thinking about, but think about towards the end when we go into the live Q&A and bring some questions to the table about the virtual environment. So I would say this one here for me was probably the best 90 minutes that I've had in the last 5 months. I mean, all of us are going through some struggles. You know, I've got kids that I'm trying to work, and we're all in the same boat. It's a totally different environment. But this was a corporate customer that wanted to bring that element of surprise to the table and bring that fun factor to their virtual environment. So what you see on the screen right here are the Spasmatics. And this was in conjunction with About Entertainment in LA. And if you've never seen the Spasmatics, please, after this presentation, Google and give yourself the pleasure of 45 minutes of one of their concerts. It is literally the best 45 minutes you will have in a while. Well, what they wanted to do was bring that element of fun to their closing ceremony after their general session. So bringing all of the people to the general session with the carrot that something fun was going to happen afterwards. And what we did was we live fed the Spasmatics from their studio in LA. But the best part about it, and this is where your creativity can really shine, there was no playlist, right? And these guys know everything. I'm seeing the comments and everybody is talking about how awesome the Spasmatics are. Well, what you can see here on the right-hand side is the playlist was crowdsourced by all of the attendees that were watching live. So their favorite hits, everybody was making a comment about their favorite hits. And then you can see here on the left-hand side, all of the votes. Well, those are people saying, oh my God, I love to hear that, right? And what this created on our social wall was this buzz of, oh my God, this is the best thing that's ever happened. And I couldn't agree more, because really, you know, this is the element of surprise that just a small little thing, bringing using the technology that you have, but doing it in a way that creates excitement. Everybody on the line has the opportunity to do that. So never forget the element of surprise and engagement and bring it to the table for your customers. So the other thing, and this is almost, you know, I would say obvious, right? Is that content is the reason why one of the reasons why people go to events. And this is a customer of ours. This was a large data conference, and the meeting planners are amazing, right? And this was a coordination of a whole bunch of people. So it was the meeting planning team at Databricks and Type A and these other companies that we work with. And basically they focused on, we've got developers that are coming to a virtual environment. What are we going to bring to the table that they love? And you never should underestimate the value of the content. So they had a dev hub, right? One place that you could always go that's going to bring together all of the components of what you would do on property, right? Don't forget that if they were on property, they would seek out other people to watch this demo or go into the exhibit hall and talk to Microsoft or whoever it might be. So never underestimate the value of the content. And, you know, when I start these conversations with event planners, one of the first questions that I always ask them, have you hugged your production agency today? Because let me tell you, when you were doing a large event, your production agency and your partners, they play such a role in making all of this fluid work and really stick with the events. So that brings me to tip number 3. And it kind of goes back to the spasmatics, right? Know who your audience is. And that again was a corporate customer, and their customer, you know, their attendees really gravitate towards the 80s and the 90s hits. Well, in a tech environment, right? Think about what's going to gravitate for these folks. And at the end of the day, what I really loved what they did was they allowed for a choose your own adventure. Do you want to listen to the live DJ? Do you want to go into Ask Me Anything with professionals? Do you want to go back and review the Dev Hub? Or what was great about this was our platform suggested content for them so that it had an artificial engine that was always suggesting content. And then on the left-hand side, remember, techie, we love games. We love technology. So they embedded a real-time game as part of their evening interface. Huge win, right? Think about your attendees, what they're going to gravitate towards, and these are the kinds of wins that you could have in a virtual environment. The other component is you want to avoid the fatigue of a virtual environment. So I'm sure at the end, people will ask, what's the best practice in content and so on. What I always tell people is give them a common goal to work around, knowing your attendee, and watch them extend, a 4-hour window to 5 hours. Gamification still is really powerful in terms of getting people to engage, right? And we do things like a swag store, right? Not just points, use that points and convert it into digital currency to use in the swag store. Again, going back to my 3 tips, right? This is where your creativity will play a role and people will walk away with, wow, now that was awesome. The other component that we like to strongly suggest and implement is problem solving for your attendees, right? So I work with a partner, and she said it best, is when you've got 70,000 people on property, there's a help desk, and they can go and they can ask their questions and they can get those fulfilled and move on. Well, in a virtual environment, as you know, as meeting professionals, we want everybody to be happy. And that's why we have that desk. But if you don't have that environment in your virtual environment, you're missing a key factor for attendee satisfaction that I would say is almost as vital as some of the other tips that I've given you here today. So one of the things that we have, loved, our attendees have been gravitating towards is across the board on everything that we do, never forget the importance of a human touch. Well, being able to reach out to somebody for help. My audio's not working, or I'm trying to network with somebody and do video phone calls. How do I do that? This component of what we call the MeetingPlay concierge should be across all of your platforms. You really want to make sure that there's a human on the other end and they're answering questions. Where we see the biggest drop-off is when there's nobody there to answer the question. Well, just like in e-commerce, right? If you can't get them to the product that they want to buy in 1.2 seconds, you've lost a sale. If you can't answer the question of your attendees and make them feel safe, go back to that where we started, right? If you can't make them feel safe, you're going to lose them. And that's the last thing that you want in an environment. Which leads me to kind of my bonus tip, right? I can't tell you how many conversations we have around what is the secret sauce to keep our exhibitors thrilled about a virtual environment. And it goes back to, again, some of the pieces that we were talking about. Get creative, make them feel safe. Well, when you remove for your exhibitors the opportunity to go face-to-face with each other, you're removing a vital part of what they get out of that exhibit hall. So think about how you can connect your exhibitors and give them that face-to-face opportunity, right? So, on my screen here, this is one of our virtual booths where the sponsors can actually go live and they can show things, but they see the other people and they can actually have those conversations. Think about how you can bring that to your events, not necessarily just with us, but there are ways that you can bring this to the forefront to give your exhibitors the tools to be successful at their events, right? And also it's all about showcasing their products. The more you can give them to do demo reels, product overviews, white papers, the capabilities of going live, like I discussed, those are things that are going to actually be a huge win. So you can excite your exhibitors. Think creatively about bringing those tools to the forefront, and you'll be surprised with what you can do. So that brings us, and again, I said I wanted to keep this short so David and I could really talk at the end and answer all these awesome questions. But that brings us to now where we are moving, or where we hope we are moving as an industry. And, I'm just going to give you kind of like my thought. I'm still probably speaking to about 25 to 30 customers a week. And some of those customers are venues, and some of them are, corporate clients, and some of them are the big user conferences, specifically in the tech arena. And I think I'm stating the obvious, but I always get this question, so I'll hit it. When are you hearing, Joe, that we're going to be able to go back on property? And there's a couple key indicators that people are watching for success before there's a massive movement back into that arena. And as everybody knows, the Together Again Expo in Orlando, I know I was on the edge of my seat watching successfully as meeting professionals got back together so that we could use that as a benchmark. Now, there have been some things that have happened since the weekend. I'm sure most of you have heard earlier today that CES made the decision that they're now going 100% virtual, where they were going to be hybrid. We have major corporations that have come out publicly to say that they're allowing people to work remotely for the next year, and the travel restrictions will come into play. Those are head forces, obviously, that we're up against, but we're still super optimistic. Remember, I'm the road warrior, right? And I want to get out there with everybody else. And the next section that I'm going to talk about is what we're really working on, which is our plan to get back on property. But I think it's going to be a little bit longer. It's like the decision of, will children go back to school in a month or so? Nobody really knows. Not all the counties have said. We were very hopeful that everybody's making the right decisions, but nobody has a crystal ball. So let's talk a little bit about getting back on property, because remember I told you, make a decision and stick with it. And with the demand that we're seeing on the virtual environment, we are going to see that demand on the hybrid next. And I'm actually going to talk about a vendor that we work very closely with, that their phone will be ringing off the hook. And if you're not already in there, you may be left behind on some of your planning. So when we, from a technology perspective, when we think about getting back on property, we've got to think about the on-site attendee experience, right? And we break that down into 3 different components, right? Before they arrive, when they arrive, and then in a hybrid environment, how do we unite everybody with a common goal, right? And look at the hospitality industry. In some respects, you could say hotels are doing it right with the marketing and the advertising and all of the, everything that's going on to make people feel safe before they arrive. But more importantly, when they get on property, the tools that we have in the hospitality industry has on place, so they feel safe when they arrive, right? So this core component is what you need to be thinking about, and technology will play a really big role in making that happen. Because, as I mentioned with the headwinds, there's no doubt about it that hybrid is going to be the future. And there's 2 reasons why I would say. First of all, the travel restrictions that are still upcoming and in place. But more importantly, I can tell you, most of the customers that we work with, virtual events have been around. We've actually been doing virtual events for 3 years. But what's happened since March is that big players, big companies are now seeing the real value of what virtual can bring to the table, i.e. registration counts 5 times what they ever thought they would be. Registration counts doubling or tripling within 7 days of the actual event. And we'll talk a little bit about those things. But what does that mean, right, for the planning? Here's the one thing that I can say before we kind of move on is, if you can't make your virtual attendees in a hybrid environment with the on-property you don't want them to feel like second-class citizens. They've got to feel like they're driving a lot of the experience. And that's where you're going to see technology play a big role in the hybrid solutions that are coming out. Now, one bonus tip that I want to talk about for all of those professionals out there that are navigating your contracts for next year. I can tell you so much of the conversations about going back on property are about how do you tie the on-property experience to the virtual experience. Well, what that means is, for all of you that have had a bandwidth contract in the 6 figures for your events, that's going to be so much more important to negotiate than it ever has. So as you're looking at your packages for when you do go back on property, think about how you can negotiate the bandwidth requirements in a hybrid environment, right? So think about, live streaming, some of the things we're going to talk about. All of these things will require bandwidth, right? And what you don't want to do is be thinking about them when you go on property. Remember my tip, make a decision and stick with it, because everything that you do will revolve around that decision and you will be better off moving forward. So what I want to do now is talk a little bit about how technology, or at least how we see technology and the technology that we will be rolling out that will be very unique in a hybrid environment. And again, this is about to get you thinking about next year and the things that you'll need to consider as part of all of your planning to be successful. So I would say absolutely the key component of it, though, is about space management. Although EU is very optimistic about this component, I don't see us happening space management, in terms of 3,000 people in a room anytime soon. So really, a lot of our technology is going to be about how do you plan good space around the attendee experience and the logistics of pulling off a good event, and then how do you combine your attendees together for that awesome attendee journey and uniting them under one goal. And most importantly, not making your virtual attendees feel like second-class citizens. So here's a sneak peek at what you're going to be seeing over the next couple months. And we're talking to our customers now about this product that we have rolling out. Is think about it this way. In the old school way, we would open up registration in the grand ballroom and 3,000 people would show up at their leisure. And we all know, because we're all in this together, they all typically show up in an hour before the general session starts, right? Well, that's not gonna work very well in the hybrid environment, or at least in the on-property environment that we're gonna be in over the next year, I would say, with the space management. So really, this is an area where I would say you've got to take clues from best practices. And we've been doing on-property, activations, and on-property badge printing is one of those core technologies that we have. So here's what we're bringing to the table that I think is going to be commonplace to get your wheels kind of moving. Is you want your attendees to feel safe before they get on property. Well, in the future, they're going to get a notification because of safe distances and social distancing. Please make your appointment for when you're going to pick up your badge. And everybody's going to get basically a boarding group or a registration group. And as you can see here from the graphic, I've been assigned an A5, badge pickup, right? And what that's doing is that's taking our 3,000 people and spreading them out so that I don't have 3,000 people showing up at the same time. And here's where it's going to get really cool, right? So again, we're taking all the tools in our toolbox with, iBeacon technology and Bluetooth and GPS, and all of this is when I arrive in the ballroom between 10:15 and 11 a.m. during my boarding group, I'm then basically going to get a ping, because I'll know the system knows that they're in the ballroom, and it's going to tell me the table to go pick up all of my material that has been sanitized by the staff. So looking forward with these kind of issues that we will have to deal with, you're going to see more technology solve these things for you with a good provider. And again, I use this example of 3,000 people showing up at the same time. That can't happen in a hybrid or an on-site property. You've got to make them feel safe ahead of time so they make that leap to come to your event. Technology is absolutely going to play a role with dividing people into groups, but then understanding when they get there and bringing them to a safe location. And this is where I go back to the hospitality industry. And also, I'll talk a little bit about one of our partners and the stuff that they're bringing out. The other thing that you're going to see is facial recognition, or not even facial recognition, but gesture recognition is going to play a much bigger role in the future of event technology. So for those people that don't go during their boarding groups, we've got to send them somewhere where they will feel safe, but they can get moving, right? So what you're seeing here was an activation that we did last year. It's probably one of the, almost one of the coolest things we've ever done. It ties in these large kiosks with facial recognition, with plastic badges that really custom created an experience. Well, this is what you will be bringing to the table for the future, so that I'm not putting myself in harm. I'm allowing technology to play a role. So these kiosks will now be outfitted with Bluetooth, and when I walk up to it, it will introduce itself and welcome you, but allow you to walk through. But the cool thing is our facial recognition technology is now going to use gestures with your hands to get you moving down that path, right? So thinking about the space and how you kind of flatten the curve with your registration, giving them tools that they feel safe though, if they're outside of that, which then leads me to, so one of our great partners that we love is Choose to Rent in Miami. And they're coming out with great technology that is also going to assist with a safe on-property experience, right? So remember, beforehand, we need to let them know the measures that are in place. So our kiosk will be retrofitted with temperature controls to look at the temperature of the individual and highlight the staff if they're above a threshold, right? So again, start thinking outside of the box. You know, this is just one company, and I love their sneeze guards and everything they bring to the table, but they're doing it the right way. And these are the things that we'll be bringing to the table for all of our customers, and you should be doing for your attendees to make them feel safe, right? So moving along, right? Let's talk a little bit again about now the attendee journey, right? How do we basically, remember, I don't want our virtual attendees to feel like second-class citizens. Well, everybody's got to play a role, right? And technology has really moved in a direction to allow for this role to be played. So we were so, things were so beneficial, or we were so grateful in that we've actually been doing virtual for a number of years. So when March hit, it was about how do we listen to our customers and build a product that is just amazing that nobody's ever seen before on the basis of what we already had. And that is where we are as an industry for when we go back to property. So how do we engage the virtual crowd, but also how do we engage the on-property crowd? How do we unify them so that there's one common goal? But again, how do we empower these folks to work together to be the greater good of your actual events? And as I mentioned, right, there are some things that have been in place for the last couple of years where technology has been building in the background that are game changers for our industry. They were game changers for when we had to pivot to a virtual environment that made it almost seamless for us to move in this direction. Well, one of the core components that I have been talking about for the last couple of years that is changing the direction of technology in the event world is Twitch. But if you go back to the webinar that I did a year ago, it was again about how Twitch is the basis for LinkedIn and Facebook to figure out how we can merge all of these things to work together. So if you don't know, Twitch is basically live streaming, watching somebody else playing a game. It was acquired by Amazon a couple years ago, and it is wildly popular. Now, not my cup of tea, but millions and millions of people are satisfied watching somebody else play a video game. So in our world, okay, customer mindset has basically switched by allowing technology to move us into this category. So when you think about how you connect our virtual environments with our on-property environments, at least we And I believe that the industry will be taking a cue from the customer norms that are now available to us. And I introduced Twitch because one of the, pieces of technology that we're rolling out that I think is going to be a game changer is our ambassador program, which I'll talk about. But I do again want to talk about the uniting everybody together. But let's go back into the ambassador program. So you've got these norms now where it's acceptable to experience something through somebody else's eyes. What we're focused on right now is taking our mobile engagement platform, our virtual engagement platform, and allowing us to identify on-property ambassadors that our virtual attendees can experience the excitement through the eyes of somebody on property. And I think what's most authoritative and most important about this is, if I'm company XYZ and I say that this person is my ambassador, well, that loses a little bit of credibility. When you allow the masses to participate, the authenticity, the honesty that comes along with that, that's the game changer. So right now we're working with some of our key customers that hopefully will go back on property very, very soon. We're putting this technology in their hands. And this was where we were when we stepped back and said, we've got something that we can go to market with, but I want to listen to our customers. And in the beginning of the conversation, I told you, 80 hours a week for the first, part of March, all we were doing was listening to people, our customers, and providing solutions. This takes Twitch, that industry norm, puts it in the hands of people and empower them to tell a story on property. This is going to be a game changer, right? Because when you tie together our platform and how, in our platform, you can actually call somebody and have a face-to-face meeting with them. We do small, roundtables. All of this technology exists. We're just modifying it and packaging it up in a way that is brilliant, right? So the other component that ties onto that, though, is the buddy system, right? So one of our most successful, a lot of our successful virtual events use our artificial intelligence to match people that are experts in one arena and other people that want to be better at what they do. And our networking or our artificial intelligence bring those two people together. What you're going to see is that artificial intelligence of matching people together in a hybrid environment is going to be so much more important than it's ever been. And then again, that plays into the ambassador component. And again, what we've learned, in all of our years is on-property activation using flashy, fun things. And on the left-hand side was, it was probably when it was so enlightening, where you took a theme of Las Vegas and you tied gamification to it, and you just see people come out of the woodwork. Those are the things that you're going to see with tying on property activation to the virtual world and having them kind of feel, having them basically feel like they are connected with each other. So hopefully today I've kind of given you a little bit, and today was meant to be, starters on thinking about how do you leverage the best practices of where we are in a virtual environment and merging them into your hybrid events, because it's going to come on strong. And kind of what I said in the beginning, right? Have a plan and stick with it, because the good providers out there, they will get booked up really, really early. And you want to be in front of a really good partner. So I will kind of go to these key takeaways, and then David and I can finally get to our conversation and answer some of these awesome questions that are coming in. So what I said, just to highlight again, it's all about the attendee perception. Your know before you go in the hybrid event is going to be 20 times more important than it ever was before. But start thinking about what you're going to implement on property to make them feel safe, right? And going back to technology again, getting your boarding group, because we only allow 100 people to pick up their badge within this time, those are the kind of cues that really need to come loud and clear. The new on-site experience will definitely be as touchless as possible. Kiosks, facial recognition, gesture controls, the table where my badge is waiting in a bag that has been sanitized. That is again where successful events will be next year. The best virtual experiences merge problem solving, know your attendees, engagement, which to me is about that element of surprise. Going back to the spasmatics, I mean, I haven't had that much fun since COVID started, right? Everybody needs that kind of awesome factor, and event professionals are some of the most creative people I know. So keep it going. And then lastly, don't make your virtual attendees feel like second-class citizens when we get back on property. Think about how we can merge the two worlds together. Of course, technology will play a role, but creating something that people talk about virtually, like, oh my God, I saw this through the eyes of a stranger. Again, who would have thought 5, 10 years ago that we would hop into the car of a stranger to get from point A to point B? Well, the future of events is to, buddy up with somebody you've never met before via a networking algorithm and experience the on-property excitement through their eyes. So, David,
Yep.
try to leave us some time to get to some good conversation here. I think it did okay. Any good questions come through?
Yes, but I have one. Can I ask one question first? With all the times we're hearing about people working remotely, and that it seems to me that the number one event is going to be going to the office, and that your technology is actually perfect. As event organizers become the cultural officers for their company, when going to the office is an event, it makes the event organizer even more important than ever. So it seems to me that you could use your technology, even trying it out right on your own companies now, to get people to know each other, to get people to connect even virtually, and then moving to hybrid.
Yeah.
You think about that.
Before I say this, and I'm sure some of my team is on and they'll all be laughing, I was the guy that had to have my team together to create and come up with that thing that's never been done before for our customers. And if there's one thing that we're hearing loud and clear from event professionals, from business owners, is that that kind of mentality is not going to last long in this new environment. We have been able to see the effects of giving people flexibility in their schedule. Earlier today, Lauren on the call saying, hey, I used to spend an hour in, walking in, but now I have a cup of coffee and I'm able to be much more effective in my creative time at my job. And you're absolutely right. This is a huge opportunity for the event industry to start thinking about those micro services. That's what I call it, micro services. And a lot of the corporations that we're working with will see the value of what a virtual event will bring to them. 2 days later, they're saying, okay, how do I bring that to my organization year round? And that's what you're talking about, is how do you capture that excitement that they never knew they could do virtually, capitalize on the Joes of the world that needed everybody together, and catapult their business forward, right? And that's a good question. And definitely, David, I would say the direction that we're moving in, at least MeetingPlay is moving in.
Well, because actually event organizers are the cultural officers for their companies now. They're the closest person to the communities. The CEOs are asking the event people, oh no, what do I do? And this is one of the solutions. So it's a good idea for event organizers to take more of a role in being proactive and bringing these to the company. So
absolutely.
So we got a ton of questions. There's a ton of activity in the chats, and we're not going to get to all of them, but we'll get to a few and we'll answer all of them. Your people are online on the chat answering them as we go too. So one of the first questions is, would you charge for a virtual event or no? So if so, how much? It's like, how do you monetize this in different ways? What's your experience?
Can I answer the question with not answering the question?
Yes.
So here's the thing, and I knew that this was going to come up, but it'd probably be another question that you're going to ask is, naturally, in the virtual environment, the registration counts are spectacular. So for the large customers that we work with that do user conferences, where they're basically trying to get their message out, they are seeing huge lifts in their registration. We work with an agricultural company, a global agricultural company. They were expecting 4,000 people online, and they were able to get 35,000 registrants. But here's the special sauce around that, is more than half of that occurred 5 days leading up to the actual event, which is unheard of in a face-to-face environment. Now, of course, there's attrition, so not all those people will show up. But when you look at the people that will show up after the event compared to what you would have had on property, that's where you start to make a financial pro or con. Is it really worth charging $45, $99, $200 when I can open this up to 20, 30 times more of the attendees? And what I'm hearing from the big user conferences is it's worth it to go free. So when you get marketing ops and you get leadership and your chief marketing officer involved, and like, wait a minute, we just had 100,000 people when we were only expecting 10, we'll do this all day, right? So it's a difficult question. It depends on your event. If you're a company that basically lives and dies by the revenue of your events, you have to charge. There's no way around it. We can't have you folding. But if you're a company that is just looking to get your message out to the masses, free is the way to go, and make it very compelling, and you'll be quite satisfied with the results.
So another question is the planning process. Everybody before COVID was saying, oh my God, the meeting is happening and they're planning events with 2 weeks notice. What is the planning horizon for these kind of events? And what advice do you give to everybody on planning a virtual event first, and then a hybrid, and then an on premise?
Yeah. So first of all, not 3 weeks.
Yeah, no.
I think, as I've been telling people, and as you know, we work a lot with corporate meeting planners, what they've been experiencing, again, is that planning a virtual event is harder in a lot of respects than planning a face-to-face. And you really need time. So those examples that I showed you about the special, concert and all of that, there's a lot of coordination to make it flawless, okay? And there's also a lot of visibility into, you don't want to be that corporate or public event that crashes. If you're expecting 100,000 people, you better be ready for 100,000 people, because if not, you're going to show up on Facebook and Twitter and it ain't going to be good. So the kind of magical number that we've been using is 8 weeks for a really solid program that brings nice elements of content, surprises, and long-lasting buzz factor. Now, don't forget, you've got to find a provider, which takes time, because I know it's a difficult decision. The hardest part of our sales process now are people that just don't understand what the options are, and they want to make the best decision. But if it takes you 6 weeks to make a decision, that's probably 4 weeks less than planning the event, and that's not good. And that's when I say make the decision and stick with it. So 8 to 12 weeks is best.
How about planning teams? How do you get the biggest bang from the generational participation? Because if you have a bunch of old codgers planning an event, or you have a bunch of young people planning an event, how do you get, if you have that many people, you have to please a lot of people. How do you the generational divide with all of this?
Yeah. So my team that's on is going to kill me for saying this.
Oh, they're killed twice.
So that's twice now I'm in trouble. Yeah. But my advice to everybody that is planning an event for a large event is, you're not going to know everything. So you do want to make sure that your departments have a seat at the table, right? So I mentioned marketing ops. What are they going to get out of it for this investment? Sponsors, marketing. You know, in a lot of cases, we're having to talk to the CEO because he wants this to be flawless. So my advice actually is give everybody a seat at the table. I'm not going to call it a committee because then my team would definitely kill me, but allow the proper folks to have a seat at the table, because that produces a much richer, engaging virtual environment, but it also reduces the logistics after, because everybody had a say in what's going on. So my advice again is let everybody have a seat at the table. You make the decision and you run with it. But just like in a normal event, is don't make all the decisions on your own, because when times get tough, that's where it gets a little slippery.
So another question is simplicity. I've been on some of these webinars. There's so much going on that I can't even figure out what to do.
Yep.
What have you learned about the programs themselves in terms of either simplicity? I noticed you have a concierge lounge to make it so easy to understand.
Yeah. So that's a great question. And it will go into one of the other things I forgot to mention early on is, remember my advice is to really know your attendee,
Yep.
right? So if I'm working with a construction company that is rolling out their sales forecast, we're not going to do a live DJ and we're not going to bring, you know, all these things to the table. You really need to know your attendee and carve out the attendee experience based around that. And we have seen two extremes. So what I was going to say is there's a lot of kind of planners or event professionals that are just checking a box to use a virtual platform when it really could have served as a Zoom meeting for 3 hours a day. That is not good, right? Then you're bringing somebody into an environment that's too complicated where you just wanted to deliver a message in a really solidified way. Whereas sales and marketing, user conferences, all of these people, they tier towards the, I can only handle 30 minutes of content before I got to do something cool, right? And then I'll come back. So my advice actually, David, is really know your audience and don't overcomplicate it. There's nothing wrong with a GoToMeeting or a Zoom checking that box off. Have a meeting to move forward with a really robust platform. I can't tell you how many sales calls I've been on where my sales team is saying, we're going to save you a lot of money. What you really need is this, and it's not this. And that's going to be the best attendee experience.
But the production values of a good presentation mean higher engagement. Is that a correct statement?
Yes. Do you remember I said, have you hugged your production company recently?
Yes.
And that is absolutely evident in the statistics that we get, right? So we're looking across all of our events to see the metrics of what people are scoring. We have a really easy scoring mechanism to collect that. When you increase the production value and you create a more visually appealing presentation, that's the difference between clicking off 30 minutes into it or staying 60 minutes, right? So again, going back to the content and keeping it compelling. And some of the best events that we do have great production companies behind them that are producing compelling content.
How about the attention span of people?
Yeah.
Like, how do you deal with that? I mean, an all-day conference on a virtual environment scares me to death sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's real, by the way. So, you know, looking at the statistics, there's so much coming in and going out and coming back in. So the problem with a virtual event is it's up to the user to decide. But that's also a benefit in some cases, right? So on average, what we're seeing being successful, and I'm sure, you know, the people paying the bill for these are probably not going to like this, but between 3 to 4 hours of good virtual content a day, really the 3 to 3.5 hours is the benchmark. Now you can supplement it with on demand, but when you're talking about live delivered content, and we have a product called Simulated Live where we deliver things live for them. 3 to 3.5 hours is your benchmark. Anything more than that, we actually see scores go lower because people are dropping off and not giving it a rightful look.
How about time of day?
Okay. Well, how about global conferences?
Oh my God, you have impossible. How do you figure that out?
Yes. So that's the other thing is, time of day is important, but whose time of day? So, all of these large conferences have to take into account the time zones of the individuals that you're working with. And most of the good ones that we're doing, there's a big pull from APAC or EU. And we definitely have seen negative comments from those users saying, hey, it would have been nice to have some engagement in my time zone, not in the time zone of the actual event. So yes, time of day, but I would add, think a little bit about your global audience because they want engagement during their time zones as well.
So how do you figure that out? I mean, who wins?
Yeah.
Like the CEOs in DC.
Yep.
The big audience could be in Asia.
Yep.
I mean, you repeat, or how do you make it work?
Yeah. So we're actually seeing it in two different ways. Okay. We have a number of clients that actually will separate the virtual environments and basically allow, say, North America to lead, and then APAC will go next, and then the EU will go. And basically what they're doing is they're cloning those events and custom catering them to those attendees each time. That's pretty successful, but obviously a lot more expensive. Where we're seeing actually more success, lower cost, is remember that element of surprise that I talked about, is don't just allow for the concert, for example, to happen during North America hours. Provide, in our tool, you can basically slice the agenda by your time zone. Well, if I see that the concert's at 5 o'clock my time zone instead of 3 o'clock in the morning, that allows me to feel like my needs are being met in my time zone.
So you also talked about surprise and things like that. Those are like mental breaks as well.
Yes.
What is your rule of thumb on giving, like, pacing?
Yeah.
These types of things.
So actually, one of the biggest mistakes that we're seeing when planning virtual events is not being mindful to those mental breaks. And I wouldn't actually say they were just mental breaks. It's now I've got to feed my children lunch. If it's a live stream session and I go to the bathroom, I'm missing a piece of that. So what I would say actually is think more mindful of those breaks, not just for the elements of surprise, but also for the people working remotely in this new world to get a break. Some of the coolest ideas that we have for those mental breaks, we've had a customer doing a cooking class during their break. Yoga is really popular for them to stretch their body and to get up. You saw the concert, which was a long break. We've done small, individual focus, like somebody at the cocktail hour with a guitar. So again, this is an area where you should strive to really get creative on what you can bring to the table.
So the last question I have is, everybody says how important the hallways are at face-to-face events. And you talked about your matching algorithm and things like that. What other things are you doing to make the hallways and the idea of the networking even more attractive, and the virtual and the hybrid?
Yeah. So I'm not in sales, but what I'll tell you is I've been so encouraged by the way that people are using the peer-to-peer video and chat to take advantage of the hallways. But more what we're seeing is, so if I were to go to an event, we work with an insurance company, and at the end of the day, they always have roundtables, or they always have kind of a bird of a feather in a tech environment. Those have been wildly popular. And that's creating that hallway environment where I can walk into a bird of a feather room about a topic, the future of events, and now I'm with 7 other like-minded individuals to discuss that topic. And our networking algorithm not only will recommend the people that you should talk to, it actually recommends those rooms to go to. So you can, again, chart your journey, and we put you into one of those rooms to discuss with other individuals.
And there's less social anxiety.
Yes. Although sometimes, you know, now you've got to make sure that your office is clean and you've shaven for the day and all kinds of other stuff to be thinking about.
Yes. Well, I have to say, I mean, we've spoken about 4 months ago, the innovation that I have seen with your company and others is unbelievable. We've gone 10 years in 4 months.
Yep.
And I think that is a testament to it's amazing how much thinking you've done. I am assuming that you're still talking to customers all the time, and this is only going to get even better.
Yeah, it's actually, if I could, I would leave the day-to-day and only talk to customers, because this has been one of the most humbling experiences for everybody in our industry. And, you know, it's tough, but speaking to everybody has given me as everybody on the line will attest to, it's given me a new perspective on life. And it's been thrilling. So I wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, you know, my philosophy is that event organizers have to be collaboration artists.
Yep.
You have to connect people in ways that are more valuable than ever. And I applaud you guys for really doing that and giving us the tools to do that, to make it a little easier. So with that, thank you so much, Joe, for the insightful presentation, the conversation, and reminding everyone that the recording will be available. And this is just the beginning of the conversation. Share your ideas, because everyone's ideas are brilliant at this moment, no matter who they are, because you just never know where that spark's going to come from. And that's what's so great about going to events, because you have that one conversation and you can change the world for the people that you're with. And so that's what we love about it. Thank you, Joe. If you have one more final comment, and we'll sign off.
I could not have said it better myself, David. So everybody, please stay healthy, and looking forward to working with all of you on the other side when we get back on property.
Thanks so much.
All right, bye-bye.